Hey, what's up, folks? As always, as we start these episodes, we'll take a minute or two to kind of hear where everybody's from in the chat. So just let us know where you're coming in from today. I know coaches are coming from sessions, so like to give them a few buffer to kind of get settled and hop on the stream. But yeah, let us know where you're from in the chat. We'll get going soon. Jason, what's up, dog? How you doing, man? Hope you're well, brother. Billy, what's up? Florida, welcome. Oh, here they come. There we go. We got some Dutch folks in here today. International crowd. Hell yeah. India, welcome. Mike, I'm in Colorado. Welcome, man. Hell yeah. Great Colorado squad. Sweet. I love it, folks. We'll keep a messaging in as we go, but I'm gonna kind of read the little preamble here and we'll get going. Unracked is a live conversation series from Bridge Athletic. Bridge provides coaching tools to world renowned organizations like the Atlanta Falcons, Naval Special Warfare, University of Arizona, and Westside Barbell. They provide those very same tools for coaches like me and you to use in our communities to deepen the training experience. Unracked is a free educational series Bridge puts on to break down the training systems, methods, and philosophies that drive performance at the highest level. Each episode takes you inside a specific approach, how it's built, how it's applied, and how it evolves under real world conditions. The views expressed by our guests are their own and don't necessarily reflect the positions of Bridge Athletic or our partners. Today's guest has been on the show before, and he actually kicked off the Unracked series with us a little over a year ago. Coming from the one and only Westside Barbell, Tom Barry and the broader Westside team have a unique perspective on the totality of the strength and conditioning field. Tom has worked with professional athletes across multiple disciplines with a deep and current focus on the martial arts, tactical, functional fitness, and lacrosse worlds. Tom has seen trends come and go, tech that helps and hurts progress, and equipment that helps athletes build into world record territory. The field has more degrees, more data, and more equipment than ever, but has any of it actually made coaches better? That's what we want to answer today. So, Tom, welcome to the show, man.
Coop, pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, and thanks for everyone for tuning in. And may I say that was a very corporate introduction. I love
I know, yeah. Well, we'll go off the cuff a little bit more
it.
from here. I got to do my my bridge blessing on the show, but I want to start off, man, with like triangulating our attendees, because I think it's important to set the stage before we dive into this topic. Personally, I'm at my first decade as a coach this year, and I've seen like a ton of cycles and changes come and go over the years. I think the, history of our profession is like a really awesome place to start today. And obviously, you've got like 2 decades of experience here. So I want to kind of go over like a broad overview of what SNC was like when Louie first started coaching, as well as when you first started coaching, and how those things have kind of evolved into today.
Okay. Um, if we start off with Lou and when he first got into it, I think anyone who's been following Westside knows anything about Lou. Lou did not start off as a strength and conditioning coach. He did not sign up for a job. He basically backed into it through mastery, um, through the practical setting. Yeah, and the industry as a whole, when Louis started, which is what the 70s, was really only just starting. If you look at Al Roy, I think he's credited as the first professional strength and conditioning coach. You had Boyd Epley come through here, and I think before that, you had Bob Hoffman, Joe Weider, who were really just promoting strength training in general. So there's kind of two sides to the coin. You had Louis coming up more in the private sector, if you want to call it that. And then you had someone like Terry Todd who kind of jumped in between both. So everything was new, and Louis didn't start off as a strength coach. He was a self-trained athlete. And the more his training partners and then developed, he was just an absolute hound for information of how can we make this better, because they left a lot of their best lifts in the gym and then didn't produce it into powerlifting meets, and just deep research through trial and error, and sadly through injury, um, kind of made Louis what he was and why we all came to follow Westside. And he knew how to make people unbelievably strong, and coaches as they grew through the industry reached out to him to go, well, how are you doing this? And that's how people like Johnny Parker back in the day would talk to Lou and so on and so forth. So Louis wasn't the typical strength and conditioning coach that is now. And I really think Louis was the strength coach's strength coach. He hated being called coach too. Um, but everything was through mastery, of which I think is somewhat getting lost today. And this whole thing, from my perspective, is not the crap in strength and conditioning. I think we're in a phenomenal area or industry and age of we can get access to information. But I do think context is getting lost, and context of lineage. If you're looking at the history of like how many people know about Oliver Meal, how many people know about Alvin Roy, Terry Todd, Bill Starr, all these people who started bringing stuff into the industry. But yeah, back to Lou. I think he, as I said, he backed into coaching through mastery about trying to make his athletes as strong as possible and trying to figure out ways to train them. And then as time went past, he had other people coming through, whether it was football, basketball. I mean, we had people from Cirque du Soleil, cricket, BMX, everything came through here just wondering, like, hey, how do you develop strength?
Yeah, that's cool. And I feel like that's one thing that Louis did better than anyone was kind of get information out to the people, so to speak. And I think, that is a big reason why I kind of believe in running the show the way we do and keeping it free. How do you feel like that component has kind of evolved since Louis? Where do you think that's at right now? And how do you sort of see that element?
In terms of giving out content,
Yeah, yeah, like sharing content, kind of making it available for people. I'm curious, like, what you see in the
yeah.
industry right now and how you approach that.
Well, like thankfully we get a lot of coaches come visit through here and through our pathway. We got about 300 coaches, so we kind of have our ear to the ground pretty well. When I first started, you would consume as much free information because you couldn't believe it was free.
Mhm.
And we still put out a bunch of articles and blogs for people to read. But I think the value of free has changed. That I think a lot of people going through cannot believe like if we're giving it for free, it mustn't be that good. Of which that wasn't the case like 15, 10 years ago. We still do. I think there's a lot of value. And then obviously it helps with traffic too. Don't get me wrong, there's two sides to it. Um, but I do believe like there is an aspect of us trying to give back and to give out information, especially if people can't afford to come here or can't afford to go through courses, that at least through podcasts and through written aspects, there's enough knowledge to go out there to help people in their strength training journeys. So I think it is hugely important, but I do think you can see it through the lens of that it is not as valuable as it once was because free, I think, equals not premium.
Yeah. And yeah, no, I would agree with you on that point. I think, like you said, the double-edged sword there. Now, I guess somewhat of like a follow-up to that is like, back in the day when Louis was coaching, it sounded like based on what you were saying, a lot of free content. He was just working on mastering the craft, kind of like, almost had blinders on a little bit to it. But like, what about yourself when you started in the industry? Like, what was the general, themes around just the sentiment around the industry overall at the time?
Mine is a little bit different. Like I came from Ireland and strength conditioning was really just starting. So when I came in through academics, I went in through exercise and health. Other people went in through exercise physiology. Um, but a professional strength coach in Ireland was not a hugely popular position. And but what attracted me to it, and I think is a part that's potentially getting lost today, is that it's for the team. Like you want to work uh for your athletes. Like you want to help your athletes reach their dreams, not your dreams. And like that comes from Oliver Meal all like through watching what Louis did. Um so when I graduated from college, I think you have that first year when you come out, you know everything. I'm like, I got this. I know absolutely everything. And then you get some practical experience. You're like, oh, I have not been taught how to handle a group of 30 or 50. Or when you have multiple people who need multiple different aspects of training, you're like, oh, I lack the practical experience. Even from the internship aspect, it wasn't as thorough as practical experience. And then when I came to Westside, I just remember my first day benching. I was doing the ACSM down for four, up for two, and then Louis was like, "What are you doing?" Like, I'm benching. He's like, that's not benching. I'm like, that's news to me. It's in the book. The book says it is. And then for the next 7 years, I was just like, oh, I was just trying to drink it all in because the practical experience far outweighed what the theory has taught. And it's, don't get me wrong, the theory is important, but I truly believe that our profession is closer to um, being an electrician or an apprentice-based aspect than it is a truly academic-based aspect. And the
Yeah.
merging of the two is huge. So that practical education I got from Lou, and then watching how he coached athletes, how he coaches powerlifters, and how he talked to coaches, and you had this slew of different people coming in. I was pretty privileged to go through that. But as we have more and more young coaches come through, and people going through their first year of college, and they're all setting up websites, been trainers, and you're like, you don't have any of the practical experience. And
Yeah.
I think that is getting lost. And then your orientation of being a strength coach is always for the betterment of the athlete. And you want to help them live their dreams rather than you want to become the most Instagram famous strength coach there is. And it's just just a natural phenomenon of the time. Um, but I do think that a lot of context is getting uh, missed, and a lot of it's on us, like our generation of strength conditioning coaches. Of we have to be a lot better mentors to try guide the next generation through, and we have to stop trying to throw each other under the bus every 2 seconds we get of like, hey, that doesn't work. When objectively, like everyone fights about systems and training, and well, you got to do this, or hey, I'm a speed only coach, and it's like it's if it's all for the betterment of the athletes and you've objective data to pass on what your training is doing, like good for you. But we're a very strange industry of egos and not a lot of unity.
It's funny you mentioned the lack of unity because I started my career at an Equinox location in Chicago before I interned with you guys, and I remember like I got there and it was like, look, you got like 3 clicks. This is how everybody trains at this club, and you're gonna be in one of 3 camps. And I just remember being like, but all these camps like kind of suck a little bit. You know what I mean? Like in their own right, they're great at, like X, Y, and Z, but it kind of was the thing that I felt like almost socially made me look into you guys at the time, like as a source of education, figuring out a system that was like, look, why can't we just use the best parts of these things and, discard the shit that doesn't work? And, I think that's kind of true for what the conjugate method is really at its core. And what Louie, really pioneered with it was, being able to apply it to so many different problems and be able to solve that problem accordingly. And to your point, like on the practical outweighing theory, like I know the difference between you as a coach from client 1 to client 100 or athlete 1 to athlete 100, like there's no doubt that there's a significant change that occurs. I mean, even you talked about, with like some of the jujitsu programs you guys do, like taking into account like, oh shit, some of these guys are lifting at like Planet Fitness, man. Like that's like a completely different ball game in terms of programming than like programming what you have available like at the club and such. So I guess like my follow up to all that is we're kind of at this place where it doesn't seem like there's a lot of really easy routes from a practical perspective to get to that point. Now, your path, right? And tell me if I'm wrong at any stage of this, but it was like internship, then you were kind of full-time coaching at Westside. Now you're obviously like the CEO, right? The standard path to kind of being able to work with athletes, of the caliber that you guys work with is like degree, CSCS, internship for free. Then you compete with like 1,000 coaches applying for the same, like typically poor paying job. Like, so I guess like my follow up to that is like there's 2 things here, right? Like, does your path even exist today? And like the second element of this is, and let me organize my thoughts a little bit. Like, do you believe that formalizing the entry point actually like helps produce better coaches, or does it just make it like more expensive to get into the field?
All right, there's a lot to unpack.
Yeah,
Let me go
big
through
question.
with I would say my pathway is very unique, but the principles are universal. In
Okay.
that, how did I end up at Westside Barbell? Well, I reached out to every strength coach or anyone who I was very interested in and seeing what they were doing. I would try schedule a call with them, send them emails, and just try see what information they would give out. And thankfully, a lot of the generation of the 90s, early 90s to 2000s strength coaches, like they're very generous with their time. Very few would charge you for it, and if they did, I would gladly pay. But then I sent a Hail Mary email over to Louie, and that's how I ended up here. The the internship aspect, I think, is hugely important. And it's like there's internships, but I think the better word is apprenticeship. Because if you look at some of the best ones out there, I look at the D1 powerhouses of like anyone who goes through that internship, it's really an apprenticeship. And look at the lineage of coaches that go through some of these head coaches now. But like you said, it's hard to get in because there's only a certain amount of offerings. And if you look at the amount of D1, D2 spaces and the spectrum of payment, it's all over the shop. And I think everyone is looking at like the top guys who are making the a lot of money, but well, that becomes a lot of responsibility. And I'm not sure if you understand how much time and sacrifice it takes to get to that level. But back to the universal principles, I wasn't afraid to ask questions, reach out to coaches, and then work hard. The best piece of advice I ever got was to train people for free at the start to gain experience. And then you never know where it's going to get you. And then whether an internship was paid or unpaid, if you got an opportunity to get your foot in the door somewhere, you did it. And that's how I got into Westside. It's supposed to be for 2 weeks, turned into 2 months, and I've been here since 2011. You just don't know, but that element of luck comes when you work hard and put your head down, and then you know where you want to get to. Um, and I think it's kind of just the industry has just changed a little bit in that there's so many avenues now to become famous, and revenue is hugely important. Like you want to have make a good life for yourself. I get that. But the strength and conditioning aspect, has always been around teams. I haven't met a strength coach that came through here that doesn't talk about their athletes 24/7. What can they do for them? They're all about the team. They got different personalities, different perspectives, but it's always their athletes first. And then whatever happens to them is second. And usually if you do your job well, you get to live out your dreams because your athletes are reaching theirs.
Mm. Okay, interesting. So this concept of like, hey, what can I do about my team? I want to dig a little deeper on that. Because I do feel like a lot of coaches kind of enter this like martyrdom mindset where they're always willing to do stuff for free. They're always kind of, taking it on the chin, so to speak, for the betterment of their athletes. Like how do you kind of formulate like the healthy boundaries around that stuff and making sure that like you are getting paid well, you are, I guess getting the respect and the dues that you're owed, when you are a quality coach.
I guess it's knowing where you want to get to and to keep applying to the, I guess, the mentorship you want to get into. It's easier said than done because there's an overabundance of people getting into strength conditioning. Now, whether they want to be strength coaches or not, most people come in through academics, through exercise phys, kinesiology, etc. So some go into sports science, some go into strength conditioning, um, but there's only a few opportunities in it to really make legitimate money.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think it's just willing to just work hard and try to go. And that's only in America. Like worldwide, like there is opportunity. Again, I traveled from Ireland to come here. Did not expect to stay here, but I was willing to pack up everything and come here for 2 weeks, which turned out to be a lot more than that. But it's just taking those opportunities, and it's not easy. Don't get me wrong, because there's a lot of challenges for it. But I will say you can see the difference of people who really want to be a strength coach and are willing to work, willing to come. We have people who come here for 2 weeks, not looking for money, just looking for experience and to learn from us because we can give at least a perspective into it. And nearly all of them are ultra successful because they've either went to the private sector or found the mentorship and guidance that they needed.
Yeah, and I know you guys have had people come all the way from like Korea, right? And stay with you guys for a
Mhm.
while, or Chile, right? So I guess talk a little bit more about those, I guess, personality factors that do make the strength coach that wants to be in the industry.
I think they're trying to simplify what they're doing. They're trying to look at stuff from a first principles perspective. they're not getting lost in the sauce of I guess like changing their workouts every month based on what's coming out. A question that we ask a lot of people is, well, who is your lineage? And a lot of this came like there's a strength coach I talked to a lot from overseas, Marshall, and he's like a lot into lineage. But we're like, well, who's your influence? Who's your lineage? And then tell us, what is your system? Like, how do you train? And the worst answers we get is like, well, I mix in this coach, this coach, this coach. And like, I understand who they are, what they do, but I want to know, what is your philosophy and strength and conditioning? Because if you don't have your own system or principles, you can't refine it. So you're going to be prone to new information or new workout comes out in 2 or 3 months, and then you completely change your system around it rather than having anything based on your own set of values and principles. So that's a common denominator with these. They're trying to enrich their own self-education and refine their own system of training by taking bits of what we're doing. Like, conjugate system is a way to train. It's not the only way. I think Louis earned the right to be absolute in what he said,
Mhm.
because he lived that lifestyle and got the results he did. My job is to pass on, like, here's how we train, here's how we interpret. Go take aspects of this and put into your system. I'm not asking you to completely change how you train athletes by verbatim copying us, because you can't. Our facilities are different. The way we work with athletes is different. And I've been pretty lucky. I get to go watch some teams train. And if you watch a D1 football team train, you realize like there's a lot more going on than just strength and conditioning.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of aspects of too with recruitment and that the long-term development of an athlete primarily is going to happen in high school now than it does in college. So understanding these aspects is a huge part. But like, I'll give you one thing that we're seeing now is the private sector coaches with the
Mhm.
NIL and stuff coming in. You have young athletes who have their own private strength coaches, and yet they train at a D1 level. Well, the disconnect between the private coach and the coaches that are working with the team is huge. So you get some time to go home for rest and recovery, but now your private coach is training you, putting on social media, look who I'm training. And instead of recovering, you've just done multiple sessions. Now you're going back instead of rested. And that's what I encourage people is to reach out and talk, especially in the private sector, because I don't think you realize how much work they are doing from a skill acquisition aspect, from sports training aspect, and the strength and conditioning aspect there, because they're adapting to context of who's in front of them. So you might have a player for 1 year before he goes, you might have him for 2 years. And are they going to do a traditional strength training session? No, they're trying to get the best football players in the field. Like, you're not trying to take an athlete and turn him into a football player. You're taking a football player and making them more athletic. There's a big difference in that.
Yeah, because I think one thing a lot of coaches, and this is true across all levels, is they get a little bit of main character syndrome, especially when working with a team. And they try to make like almost strength and conditioning the sport, so to speak, as opposed to the thing that helps them get better at the sport. So I definitely second what you're saying there. And I guess one follow-up question I had to all that, because I think there's so much to unpack, but the thing that really stuck out to me was someone building confidence in their own system to be able to kind of resist like essentially the noise in the industry. So how might a coach become confident enough in their own system?
It's experience. Like, it's the amount of stuff I did incorrectly at the start was like a lot. And then over time, and Louis would give me enough room to either dig a hole or find my way out of it. But an experience doesn't come fast. That's the thing. I think everyone wants to have the best, uh, be the best strength and conditioning coach in the first 2 or 3 years. And like, it just doesn't work like that. Now, you can learn from the greats before us for sure, but finding your own voice, finding who you are, if you're introverted or extroverted, like, you might be a master motivator. You might be really good at programming. It's finding out who you are and then trying to be true to that. And that takes a minute. And then it's constantly refining uh, what you're doing. And then reflection, self-reflection, all those things are huge. And understanding, educating your athletes is equally important.
Mm.
Like, words matter, and I think a lot of nomenclature is getting jumbled up. Um, I go back, like, you have velocity-based coaches, and you have people saying like intent, and like, what do all these mean? Like they're if you're not using them correctly, they're going to get watered down and be used in the wrong context. And I think that's a lot of what you learn throughout the years of you're trying to educate your athletes, from the warm-up aspect to the actual workouts. Is like, did you explain warm-ups to your athletes? And it's a lot of people are just going through the motions of like, I'm just throwing in a warm-up or I'm just following a piece of paper, and you're not adapting to the context right in front of you. You're not giving the athletes enough education. You should empower the athletes. If you see how we run a group here, and anyone's more than welcome to come see it, the athletes pretty much run the show. We are there just helping, facilitating. And if we see anything, we'll point it out maybe at the end of the session. But our goal was to make the athletes, and this is from Lou, the best strength coaches for themselves. And that's through education and through guidance. But back to the original thing is time. And I don't think people are willing to rush, or they're trying to rush through this. And then I see it like, I'm not much for social media anymore, but I do get some clips and stuff. And then these are unbelievable coaches who've been in it for 30 or 40 years putting out information. And then you got people saying that's not going to work. And you're like, that's insane to me. Now,
Yeah.
opinions are opinions, don't get me wrong, but everything is based off experience and objective data. Um, yeah, so I'm kind of waffling on here a little bit, but it comes down to it just takes time. And
Yeah.
but principles is creating your principles and not straying from them. It's been willing to experiment on yourself first, then goes to your athletes, and then choosing someone as a mentor. Like that is, and whether if you can't get into someone physically, well, Louis, most of his mentors were from books like Verkhoshansky, Zatsiorsky, Kurz, Medvedev, all that. He got these Russian manuals and lived it, and then interpreted into like the modern day conjugate system, which is basically blending concurrent and conjugate together.
Hmm.
Uh, but that's who he used as his mentors. But having some orientation, then developing or refining your own system, and um, at the end of the day, you're trying to make your athletes strong and fast and more robust. That's
Hmm.
it, so they can get the best opportunity for skill acquisition.
And do you find a lot of people miss those basic points? Strong, robust, fast, and I forget the last thing you said, but just better at skill acquisition.
I think, yeah, it's hard not to like get lost because there's so many ways to train.
Mm.
And they're like, well, I'm a philosophy-based strength coach. Like, I don't know what these things mean. You're either a strength and conditioning coach or you're not. And you may have areas of where you're big into speed, but what is it? And I'm robbing words. I won't drop the coach's name, but when you're saying you're looking at averages, if you bring in an athlete and go, hey, we're going to do an average training session, they're going to go, there's no way. Like you're looking at peak. So if you're going to do speed, you're going to do speed work. If you're going to do max effort work, you're going to be doing stuff for stress and straining. Like this is, it's pretty simple. Like you try to bring it down to first principles and then try not get lost in the sauce of, well, this guy is doing this is doing that. If you look at all the NFL organizations, if you look at D1, there's all differences of programs. And it's just trying to figure out which one you can implement the best and refine and bring with you. Because that's what you do as a strength coach. You have your own system and methodology and you bring it with you everywhere you go. And if you keep chopping and changing that, you have no traction, you got no principles. You're willing to like turn left and right at any moment, just seeing which way the industry is going.
Mm. Yeah, that's a really good point, I think, because your system you almost don't know how good your system is at that point because you haven't actually forced it to stand on its own 2 feet. So that's really interesting. And like I think that a lot of this comes back to a problem that we have with like the content driven economy of strength
Mhm.
and conditioning. So, you know, I think we see a lot of negatives, but also like to tell a little bit of my own story, like I don't think I would have found you guys without social media. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of positives to reap, and I certainly consider myself as part of the Westside lineage, and like you guys were my mentors for a solid period of time, and like just feel like need a little help kind of mapping this stuff out. Like, how do you guys see the influencer strength coach? Um, and like how do they kind of run in parallel, I guess, to like just the actual like working strength coach who's out there just getting it done with their athletes.
I'm not going to here to belittle anyone who is a strength coach or who's an influencer in strength and conditioning. We all try to get out our information. I think we try to keep ours as objective and clean as possible. And yeah, you're right. You found us through social media, but you took the trip down here too.
Yeah.
And I don't think we've never refused anyone for information. If someone came through here, paying or not paying, like our door is always open for anyone who wants to learn. It's just looking at the credibility of the person who is talking. Of like, look at their lineage. How long have they been in the sport? Are they regurgitating other people's work? And it goes back down to reading. Like theory is great until you actually practically put it in. Like there's a big difference too than learning how to teach or how to train a person. But then when you have 20 people in front of you, it's not linear. Like there's so many things contextually you have to change up for that. And a lot of that comes from experience. So it's a great way to get information. And then people make money doing influencing. Like good for you. Like you found a part of our industry where was not there before and you're making income on it. I respect that. But I go back down to strength conditioning practitioners to where you have to go further than just the theory. You have to go look at. I just remember a change when you started reading articles and
Mhm.
blogs, and then references just stopped. And I was one of the people like I like looking at the references because I want to deep dive into where did all this come from. So it's the same thing as like if you see something that's cool online through influencers, they're great, but try to explore it more. Just don't take it verbatim,
Mhm.
especially if they've been in the industry for 5 or 6 years. Um, you just want to just to question it and then see how it fits within your system. But at the end of the day, as a strength coach, you're trying to develop your own voice, your own system based on the information coming in. And I think there is a lot to research and a lot to reading, like physical books. Like I am part of that generation that still likes physical books and highlighting and dog earing
I'm
corners.
the same way, man. Yep.
Um,
Yep.
but with technology too, you can research a lot faster. You can go down into deep rabbit holes. But once that comes into context, once you're back into like, I am doing this for the betterment of the athletes, I am not here trying to become the most famous strength coach in the world. I go back down to Louie. Louie did not want to be famous at all, not one bit. It just happened over time. And I think people need to look back at the elders in our industry and look to them and like start picking their brains because they're giving out information left, right, and center, and have most of them don't charge. And looking for the strength coaches that just retired that are coming out, like those are the people you should be looking to the elders. And I think the NSCA and all these organizations who are like our gateways into strength conditioning should be pushing elders more of like, hey, here's what the field manual is. Here's what the practical approach to this is. Here's what it means to actually care for your athletes and how to adapt on the fly. Um, and try to get rid of this absolutism
Mm.
because there is absolutely no absolutes. You have your principles, which are universal, don't get me wrong, but uh, a big thing we get is, well, you max your athletes out year long. I'm like, no, we don't. We use the max effort method, but it's in context of when we need to use it and when we don't.
Mm. And I guess the 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 question I have related to that stuff is like it's so it's so easy for people to get access to information right now, especially
Mhm.
like because you can just click into chat GPT and ask it a question and it can give you 7 billion resources and links, right, to go deeper. And I know you've sort of alluded to this element of like, trusting the elders and understanding, kind of the underpinning things that led them to making those decisions. But I guess a more general, a more broad question that I have around how you guys go after information is like, how do you personally vet like new stuff that's coming out in the industry? And then how do you go about the process of experimentation on it in the actual facility?
That's, I guess everyone's different. I try to go through articles, blogs, and talking to coaches and seeing what
Mm-hmm.
they're doing, what's working. Then if I find something that's really interesting, then it comes into our own training. Then we try to experiment with it. And this is what I followed from Lou. Like Lou made me read every other book outside of his books.
Yeah.
And to learn how to cross-reference, you have to read three books at one time. Because if you only read one book, you would think that's the best book ever. But if you've got three books, now you're cross-referencing. Um, then we'll pull a small cohort because we can do that here. I know not
Mm-hmm.
many people can, and then we'll see if it carries over. But I make sure it still aligns with the principles, it still aligns with the culture, and it still aligns with the athletes first. If it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't fit within that, even if it looks great, if it doesn't fit within those things, then we won't do it. And I can give you an example. A couple of years ago, I went, oh, too far down the rabbit hole of I don't want to tell the company's name, but where you get devices that measures force. And I got
Hmm.
absolutely everything that they had. And I thought, oh, this is I was just geeking out. And within 2 months, I had to try to give it all back because it just didn't fit the cultural values
Hmm.
of to where the athletes weren't buying into it in terms of like they would do it because I'm asking to do it, but you could just see it was just changing the culture in the gym. And I'm like, okay, this is going against that. So that's how I cross-reference everything from the principles, the cultural value, and are the athletes, do they need it? Are they getting better? Because there's so much stuff you can do and it may have benefit, but do you really need to do it? And back to first principles, and we try to make training pretty simple. It's not sexy, but it's simple and effective.
Mm. Elaborate on the reason that that changed the culture in the gym.
Uh, so we only have athletes for a certain amount of time per week. And when they come in here, doing dynamic effort and the other days, max efforts, depending on where they're at, we put these in as a secondary, and they it just wasn't giving them the carryover that they thought, and it wasn't it was too clinical, should I
Mm.
say. Like it has great aspects if it's in a therapy aspect or if it's a manual therapist or an athletic trainers using it, but it took the strength out of strength and conditioning. And I'm like, oh, okay, that was my fault in that one. So we took it out. And that's the thing. I want to at least keep strength in the strength and conditioning aspect because I want my athletes to be stronger and faster.
Okay, and so I guess what took the strength out of strength and conditioning? Was it that you were looking at these like measurable outputs, but it was like reducing intent? Or was it literally just taking time away in the session to do something that you saw no return on?
Correct. It was taking time away from the session for stuff that I knew had carryover and to implement this because I thought we could objectively train the joints. Like that's what
Okay.
I thought. But we could train the joints other ways we're doing it and was just as effective. And it didn't ruin the flow of the training session. It didn't
Mm,
ruin the flow of the culture of the athletes. And it was just, again, just too clinical for our setting. I'm not saying it's incorrect. Other people use it to great
totally.
effect. But
Yeah.
that's one thing is like it deviated from our cultural values.
Yeah.
And I'm here for the athletes. So if they're saying like, hey, we're not really going into this, respectfully, they'll do what we ask them to do, but it's a synergistic relationship because no one pays to train here. So it's a we want, and because of that, they buy into us, we buy into them, and it's a synergy if when they
Mm.
get better through it. So you just listen to the feedback from it. It just wasn't for our culture, which I think is a big thing, is to where there's a place and a time for the sports science, but it wasn't within the strength training.
Okay. Yeah. It's interesting looking at, let's take a NFL football team and how many departments they have and how many of the athletes go between those departments in a given day for various sessions, various training, various like whatever, right? You guys almost seem to be kind of preserving this level of purity with like strength and conditioning, right? That is what you guys do. You're not physical therapists. You're not, anything else in that bucket. So I want to understand, like, how do you think about these coaches that almost appear to be like hybrid in nature, where it's like, hey, I do physical therapy and I do strength and conditioning, or I do, like sports science stuff and strength and conditioning, like anything in that kind of multidisciplinary coaching aspect? Like, how do you think about that?
More power to them. I can't do it.
Sure.
I want to be very good at one thing,
Yeah.
and I'd much rather work with people who are experts in their field. And then what you have is a really good feedback loop with other experts rather than, and this is from my perspective, if I'm trying to do everything, then I'm just talking to myself. But if I'm talking to a physical therapist, if I'm talking to a dietitian, if I'm talking to a sports scientist, now you got four eyes on one, and we're able to generate like a lot more like objective data rather than one person trying to do everything. So if people are able to do that, more power to them. That's not for me. Like
Mm-hmm.
Louis, like one of many of Louis' quotes that he stole was from The Rock, was know your role. And I know my role is just a strength coach. Like I love strength and conditioning. I love the tools of strength and conditioning, from barbells to bands to different types of machines to stuff where you're actually lifting weights and one of the unique aspects we have in the gym is objective adversity. Like, you know, if you're getting better because you're either doing more sets, more reps, lifting more weight. So it's really good for goal setting. Like, that's what I love about the aspect of strength training. There's no subjective aspect to it. Yeah, so but if they're able to do it, good for them. I know I'm not.
To your point, like I love what you're saying there. I also feel like I don't see a lot of coaches that think the way you think about that, right? Where they're obsessed with equipment. They're obsessed with like what, a Cybex leg extension does versus a prime leg extension and things of that nature. Like, do you think that's something we're losing with a lot of the tech in the space?
Yes and no. I think technology is great. It's a great feedback mechanism. I think it'll be an issue if you let technology dictate and takes the art out of coaching and what you're doing. But like, equipment is equipment. Like, and I know people nerd out about it. Don't get me wrong, and I do myself in some things. But at the end of the day, I'm trying, what's the simplest way I can train an athlete? And I'm not a big advocate of um I don't know, I like technology and I like it to give us feedback of like, hey, are we on the right track? Is there stuff here? But I don't ever let it become the master. And it's the same with like tendo units. Like, they're back in vogue again. Like, things come in cycles. And like, I want our athletes to go as fast as they need to go. Or we're looking at like peak velocity. I'm not trying to do the average. Like, Louie really put out there the zero point 0.7 to zero point 0.8 meters, which is years ago with the first tender units. And like, stuff has evolved since then. They're a great tool, but I don't let it dictate the training sessions, and nor like would I subscribe to, well, they're going slower. I'm going to keep stripping off weight until they get that rate of force development. And I'm like, you're just taking strength out of the strength training. Like, my goal is this, and to where if you want to do speed, then just do speed work. Like, do actual peak velocity work where you're going after the top end. As I said, I don't really subscribe to the averages a whole lot because I don't really want average athletes.
Yeah. No, I like what you're saying there for sure. And obviously you guys have so much like education that you put out into the industry, right? So I think we talked a lot about how you guys kind of intake and evolve with the education, but I feel like you guys have always been a loud player in the space between books, seminars, just the brand in general. You know, like you guys charge for some of it. You also put out a ton for free. And I'm really curious, like, where's the line in the sand for you guys in terms of like something that you charge for versus something that's really free? Let's talk through that real quick, that aspect of your education.
Well, we got to keep the lights on, and we have to
Yeah.
keep the like it's not all philanthropic. Don't get me wrong, but
Yeah.
Louis never created Westside to be a business. It was a
Mhm.
club. That's first and foremost. Like, Westside, and like, my job is split in two. One is the legacy side of where we have the old school gym here, where was the club, the record board, everything. And a part of that is to ensure people know that legacy and lineage where stuff comes from. Because if not, someone else will try say it was theirs, and they'll go off and try have critical acclaim in the strength space. And the other side is that we need athletes in the gym, and we need to learn from them and pass on that information. So we try balance it as best we can. I don't think we ever go too overboard with our social media posts. I would say we're pretty mundane, educational. Like, we're not known to being very funny or put out these things. Like Louis back in the day, they put out monstrous lifts. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Um, then the other side is like, nothing is free. Like, we're trying to keep the website going, keep the business going. So we try and make everything at a fair price, and we
Mhm.
really try to underpromise and overdeliver everything we do. Um, but that's really it. I would say our business model, people can't believe we don't charge athletes. And I'm like, well, the athletes is where we get our education from. And that's how, when coaches come here and they talk to us and see how we train, they know it's not theoretical. It's not based on people who are not there. So that's a huge part of what we do. And then we just try to balance it as best we can. Like, we want to make some money, we want to make all of it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's interesting to think about because obviously you make the money you make putting the conjugate method out there, but then I also feel like I see a ton of grifters. who kind of take what you guys put and almost claim it as their own. Like, do you ever feel like you're cannibalizing yourselves or working against yourselves by putting stuff out there?
No, because I want to see people's interpretation.
Hmm.
Like I want people to go out, do their own thing with conjugate. And once you give credit to where the source or where you're getting from, like to where if it wasn't for Louie, we wouldn't know really about conjugate or concurrent training. Like he was the one to put it out there and like sleds, bands, camber bars, board press, like a lot of that was either invented or popularized by Louie and the Westside Barbell athletes.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, the whole idea is like we don't want to keep this in here. We want to pass on and like we want to see people's interpretation. Like in our pathway, seeing people how they've interpreted the conjugate method for themselves is phenomenal. I don't want to begrudge people like making revenue off that. Like that's what we want. We want there to be we want to support the coaches that come through here that use conjugate. And then like there's you're gonna have that if you do anything that's good, you're gonna have people who are gonna try create their own version of it. But I much rather interpretation and then people advancing it and refining it. Um, it's all part and parcel, but yeah, it's a teach. I just don't like people who put out bad information. Uh,
Hmm.
that like Louis, he had a trademark, often imitated, always irritated.
Hmm.
And that came after two things. One, people would copy his equipment, but they never make it better. And two, they would try to copy his education, but they never advance it.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. Now, what what part of you guys sort of, I guess, looks at the broader industry and says, like, or better way to ask this question: how do you know when you've seen a good evolution?
I think when you start seeing, and we've had a few come through here of newer strength coaches who you can clearly see their lineage. You
Mm,
can see they got good mentorship. They understand how to read a room. They understand the importance of athletic training. They're not stuck in absolutes. They ask really good questions. To me, that's when you see everything evolving because they're willing to do the research of like, hey, maybe this was invented before me, or maybe I'm not coming up with something new. Um, so that's when I think you see evolution going in a positive direction. And a negative is when you have kids that are coming in here in their first year and they are, and I don't begrudge people making money, but when you're trying to train people and charge for it, you better be a expert in it. And they have no understanding of history. Like I think it's just very important to understand the past. Like you don't have to reinvent it, but understanding where everything came from, then you're way better suited and to find mentors, whether real mentors or if it's online and pick a lineage, pick something that you believe in and to start creating your own principles and your own system to work from.
mm, okay. Yeah, I dig that. And so let's talk about like building your own system and diving into that a little bit. And I think there's a massive community element. So I want to start with kind of exploring like how has the SNC community kind of improved since you've gotten into the industry? I also want to know how it's gotten worse. And then I want to dive into like, kind of leveraging that to really in the modern era, as a coach, build your own system confidently.
Let me like start with the caveat of like I'm in a very unique position that we get a lot of coaches from around the world and like to come in through here just to chat it up. Um, but there's probably better representations for the professional strength and conditioning field than there is for me. So understand that with everything I'm about
Yeah.
to say. Um, the I don't know how to put it, but this the strength coaches, I think there's something special again about those 90s to 2000 strength coaches. And I think leaning into those and trying to see where they came from and understanding their thought processes and understanding of what worked for them, but what didn't work for them. Because if you can find out what not to do, it's very easy to create what to do. So if you can avoid mistakes and pitfalls while you're developing your own principles and systems, that's a huge thing. And I think that's where you got to look to the past and look to the people who are walking the pathway that you want to walk with. And that goes through like maybe you don't want to be a strength and conditioning coach, maybe you want to be a personal trainer, maybe you want to be an online influencer. or at least pick some track that you can follow and then avoid the pit stops of what not to do. Um, I have digressed in my head to another answer, but I want to go. Can you recap the question again, Coop? So I can.
Yeah, I think I'm just curious, like, so point A here, right, is understanding like how the S&C community has improved
Oh yeah,
over the last, like, let's say 2 decades. How has it gotten worse? And I want to use those 2 points to kind of form the discussion further on how a coach can be super confident in our
gotcha.
system. Yeah.
So from point A, it's easier to connect and get information than it ever has been.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Okay.
that's a huge improvement. And I think you have people out there who are putting out great content. And I think you have access to elders in the community that want to give back, like they are truly philanthropic. They have reached the highs of the highs, and now they want to give back and mentor and teach. And I think access to that is huge. If
Mm-hmm.
you, I think back in Lose, there was just books, like maybe letters, and then it was phone calls and meetings. And um, one thing that I'll give Lou, like I give Lou so much credit for everything, but was the calls. He would take 30 or 40 calls a day. I'm like, why would you do it? And I wasn't until we started the pathway talking to coaches every day. I'm like, oh, because it's just passing information. You're learning what people are not understanding, and then trying to educate them. So I think that is a great thing with the industry. And the other side of it is there's so much. There's I think there's tribalism, and then there's absolutism that is trying to make people pick this one camp over the other. And if you're a good strength and conditioning coach, you're never going to throw out any tools or any methods or any systems. You're trying to learn from it. And I think there needs to be somewhat more unity of strength coaches. You don't have to, we can debate and disagree on systems, but if you train athletes and they're getting better in their sport and they're more robust, and I tell you, hey, Coop, your system doesn't work, it's useless. Well, objectively, I'm just telling a lie.
Yeah.
And that doesn't benefit anyone. And like I'm not, this is not some kumbaya, let's get together. I mean, there just needs to be some professional standards of like how we interact and raise ourselves up. If you look at the industries of athletic therapists and all them, they all stick together pretty well. Strength and conditioning coaches seem to be a lot more fractured of, and again, there's a monetary aspects, I get that, but there needs to be some commonality of like, well, what is a good strength coach? What is a bad strength coach? There's no strength coaches rating system. They had that in the Soviet Union back in the day where we got all that stuff. They had some sort of rating systems for coaches. But what's a good coach? What's a bad coach? And I think like hopefully the gatekeepers, educators of the strength and conditioning world will like figure out like some universal aspects of that. Because I think that'd be very helpful to this
How would you
industry.
do it? Yeah, how would you do
I'm too dumb to come up with that. Don't
it? Fair
far above
enough.
my pay grade.
Fair enough. And well, let's talk a little bit about, some of the organizing bodies around this. Like, one thing I think that coaches have to come to terms with is, like, you are going to have to get, for certain jobs, you're going to have to get a degree. You're probably going to have to get a master's degree and or a PhD, and you're going to have to pass, like a CSCS. Like, do you think that all of that creates good coaches? Do you think that that's like how should that evolve?
I mean, that's a far bigger question. I think be better put to people more in that industry. But what I do know is not all the highly educated strength coaches are the best strength coaches. Some of the best strength coaches in the world never, like, I'll go to Lou, never went to college,
Mm-hmm.
barely, but he got into strength and conditioning through mastery of figuring out actual strength training. So I don't think it's the be all and end all. How that evolves, that is probably one for the organizations more so than
Mm-hmm.
a guy here in the Peanuts gallery trying to tell.
Sure.
But yeah, I think there's some sort of balance to it. But I just truly believe just because I went through, I came from academics, got into Westside, and then the practical experience was just out of this world.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me about 7 years. It might take people faster, but I was lucky I was in that position, was able to do it. But I think there should be a lot more emphasis put on if you're going through academics for strength and conditioning, that there needs to be an apprenticeship aspect. I know there
Mm-hmm.
is internships, but not all internships are equal.
Yeah.
And I just think there needs to be more put into the practical approaches, and I think you need to get more diverse, um, I guess, looks into strength conditioning, that you're not just solely in one demographic. Because I think that will, the more broad or more well-rounded you are from different types of athletes, I think better your imagination, interpretation of how to adapt strength and conditioning helps.
Hmm. What would you recommend then for coaches to obviously like they can travel to you guys like we know that we've talked about that but like this I want to dive a little deeper into the unity of strength and conditioning coaches and kind of this internship and apprenticeship model like you mentioned let's start with the unity element you mentioned that really stood out to me as like what needs to be different in order for us to have unity and like what would the outcome be where you know that we're more unified as an industry.
Well, I think one is normalizing nomenclature,
Mm-hmm.
that it's all used correctly. I think that will help. I mean, just unify how people coach and talk, and like that's not about just cueing; it's about general understanding what everything is. Um, the other aspect of is I'm all for debate, but it has to be healthy debate and not like trying to chop everyone down. Like this whole meathead aspect of like, yep, there's people who love the gym, yep, there's people who love sports science, but it's just having some common ground in between. And how you do it, I don't know, but I like it has been done before. Like
Mm-hmm.
back, I mean, back in Lose and everyone like they all talked and cross-trained, and I think that's what it comes down to is people actually talk more physically, or at least on the phone, rather than via posts or um, authority hijacking based videos of breaking down or tearing down this, because that's entertainment, and
Mm-hmm.
for like people can do that all day long. But for strength and conditioning, I just think people need to talk more, especially the people who've been in it for a longer period of time. Um, which you can make the argument that's where the conferences are from, but not everyone's going to go to an NSCA conference or a CSCCA conference or um, yeah, I just think it would make people getting information or the ability to get information a lot easier if they knew like, okay, these are all legitimate strength coaches that are passing that information.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that plays into this internship apprenticeship element. Like what in a perfect world, like what would that model look like to you?
Like, I'm not saying that this is the way or that this has been fully thought out, but I do like the apprenticeship-based model of if you do a trade. I think strength conditioning, there's an aspect of strength conditioning that is a trade. Now, if you want to get into sports science or exercise physiology, 100% like the academic
Yeah, you're gonna need
is
that.
there. Yeah. And
Like
then
a
you have,
doctor, right? Like you got to go to
yeah,
like medical school or a lawyer. You got to go to
or
law school.
into a laboratory, and like they're hugely
Yeah.
important. But I do believe that strength and conditioning is a trade, and that the more you, if you have more apprentice-based aspects to it, along with, I don't know how they do the trades here, but back home, you have an element of college and you have an element of practical. But I think the practical has to be weighed, if not more important or as important as the theoretical aspect. And that internships can't just be willy-nilly, like to where, oh, I'm going to do my internship, I'm going to like throw out my name to different places. It has to mean something, that you're
Mhm.
actually going to learn something. But an apprenticeship, you have to prove that practically you know what you're doing.
Yes.
And I think that'd be a huge step for the weight room aspect. I'm not saying for the sports science aspect, but just for the strength and conditioning aspect.
And so then what is the art of coaching in your own terms?
Oh, the ability to read the room, adapt to what's in front of you, not get stuck in absolutes, and have your own set of principles, cultural values, and be able to mold them around your athletes. And at the end of the day, have your athletes reach their potential or reach the dreams that they want to get to. But the
Mhm.
the art of coaching is just, I think it's been able to manipulate what's in front of you based on your experiences.
And almost be able to make those instantaneous changes, right? Like one thing I always admired about Louie, like just, one of my favorite things at my internship with you guys was like just standing there in silence and just watching how Louis approached the morning crew, right? And the way he would break down what went wrong in someone's lift and then go select exercises on the dot right, that they should go do to address that weakness, and then boom, have them go execute. I that to me was like watching true artistry in my mind. So, obviously time, experience, patience, those are all kind of ways, but there is this underlying element of science,
Mhm.
right? That gives you the confidence to make those decisions and know that like for sure this is going to work. So, like, I do want to talk about that science side. Like how, like what is the intersection in the marriage of the art and science there?
It's sports science and strength science is important, but there's a lot of time the weight room is far ahead of the science.
Yes. Yeah.
Simply because you got ethics boards to get past to do these experiments. Even some of the studies that are only coming out on resistance bands. This is stuff we knew 20 years ago.
If not more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but like there's so it's hard like and to where I think there's sports science is hugely important. Um, but it doesn't have to be the be all and end all for a strength coach to understand sports science to a science well to an academic level. And again, it should be a feedback mechanism of is what I'm doing working the way I want it to work? Is there anywhere else we can improve upon? And I think if sports science and data science becomes the be all and end all, because I think it's making huge steps to reduce overtraining. I think
Hmm.
science has been a huge part into that of like they're not being ran to death. They're actually getting objective measures to go, hey, when you sprint or hit the ground with your feet is an impact. And it does take its toll. So I think like there's huge aspects, but I'm particularly talking about the weight room. Like there's a time to have sports science, but like I don't want to bring a scalpel into a weight room. I want to build sledgehammers. Like that's where I want like that aspect to go through. So
Yeah.
if you're in the sports science aspect, I mean, it's a booming industry, but just be in sports science. Don't be a strength coach, sports scientist, or data scientist. Like you're either a strength coach or you're. This is my opinion. Um, you're into sports science or you're a data scientist, and you're feeding back into it. And I think there needs to be a head, like the head strength coach should be. Now, this is, I would say, depending on what side of the fence you're on, I think like they should be in charge of the weight room and athletic training. And either that or you got two. And I think when I did a podcast with Joe Ken, he talked about this of like you at least have two people at the head, but if strength and conditioning is under athletic training, which it is in a lot of things, I think you're going to have some sort of a watering down of that. Um, Back to like I think the presentations of strength and conditioning coaches of like they know the athletes inside and out. Um, I've never understood why the strength coach is on the sidelines for some football games, pulling back the managers or give them water. Like I just don't think it amplifies the position because I think they're far
Yeah.
more important. Um, I can't remember who it was, but like if you're a get back coach, that's not what you want to be like. You're a strength coach, and I think there needs to be some more professionalism aspect into the strength aspect of it. But I'm digressing here, but I think the source sports science is important as a feedback mechanism. But if you're into sports science, you go down the road of sports science, which again, if you do, you have to be in a laboratory, right? You're not going to
Yes.
theoretically learn this through books. You have to do it through actual practical application.
Yeah, yeah, you have to learn, my wife's a biostatistician, like you have to learn some crazy shit, you know what I mean, in the lab. Like it's like the lab is becoming the art of creating a study, the art of creating like all these things is where like yeah, you have to go learn that, and that but that's different than, at that point from the art of coaching.
Mhm.
Right. And yeah, I think you're right. Those lines get muddled, and the marriage of those two things is, something that may typically end in divorce, when applied inappropriately. So, you know, at the same time, like just the human population, though, right? We're getting access to like shit we've never had before.
Mhm.
AI, software. Um, and it's been cool to kind of see how at like, on the bridge side of things, how we're leveraging AI to help augment, performance teams across the world, or even just like mom and pop strength coaches who've been on Excel spreadsheets. So like, I'm curious from your perspective to dive into the weeds of technology.
Mhm.
And maybe it's the best place to start is just like an overview of how you guys at Westside view technology in the pursuit of strength.
I think it's great for capturing data. Like obviously we use Bridge for tracking all
Mm-hmm.
our athletes' volumes, progress. Um, I mean, we dive pretty deep into AI. Like we got Nitro AI, which basically we took everything that Louis has ever said, wrote articles, and it gives us our own database that we can cross-reference
Hmm.
really quickly. So I think there's a huge advantage to it. I do think there's an aspect of you're going to have a generation of AI coaches who are just going to type in stuff, take it, but not have any context. And the reason I say that is when I'm using AI to try to develop a website of which I have no clue what I'm doing. I'm just telling, hey, this magical AI god, make this. And I think it looks great, but I got no context whether the back end is correct. And then
Yeah.
I was just thinking, well, if I'm doing that for someone else's industry and they're going to do that for hours, you're going to have a lot of people getting screwed up because there's no context been brought in. But it's phenomenal for research. It's phenomenal to like if you look at Notebook LM, being able to digest information
Yeah.
really quickly. There's
Yes.
huge advantage of it to like to educate yourself fast. So like we're not opposed to it, but I think we're cautiously optimistic of how it's used and put in. But nothing to me is ever going to replace being actually in the gym and
Yeah.
talking to the athletes. And it's just a marriage. Like you have that and then you have your feedback. And for self-reflection, going back, looking through, and Louis is calculating volume. It was just done in his head. Like he was just unbelievable at that.
Freaking brilliant. Yeah.
But that's where technology helps. And if you're in a time crunch and if you use tender units to measure velocities because you got huge amounts of athletes in front of you, like yeah, just use it, but don't let it be the dictating force of how training is going. Like have it as tools. And that's the way we see them. They're very useful feedback tools to give you um, data to see if you need to course correct, but they're not something that is like a GPS. I'm going to follow technology blindly.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. I like that. I like that a lot because I think we're gonna have more people, and we already do, who are convinced that they're like really fucking smart at something they have like no mastery in because the AI told them that this is the way to do it and use some flowery language about them being like, oh, so my bad, you were actually right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think it puts more of an emphasis now on making sure that coaches get to the crux of mastery, right? And I want to know, like, in your terms and how you guys think about it, like this mastery piece, right? Because I'll use an example and dive into hopefully a more well thought out question. But the brief I was putting together for someone where maybe doing some partnership stuff within the we found was that the more um the more information I put in that was my own creation. I did 80% of the work and it just helped me get that last 20%, right, to look clean and to like be authentic to the element I'm trying to get. So what I guess I'm trying to say is when it comes to mastery, right? And getting to that 80%, so to speak, of like stuff that works, like where do you feel like coaches need to focus the most inside of a session with athletes live to start to get mastery?
Uh, that is a good question. I would think, if I'm just going off how I learned the most, was to keep your eyes open, keep your mouth closed, and to listen, and then get really good at asking questions. The
Mm-hmm.
athletes will tell you more about um, training than you may think.
Yep.
So just developing those relationships is huge. And then the more you empower your athletes in the weight room, the more you can actually coach and observe. If you have to do absolutely everything for them, well, then they're just going to become an assembly line. But if they're self-sufficient, you can actually watch and observe and make either mental or physical notes. I think that is a form of it. I think mastery really just comes over time. As much when after my first 3 to 6 months on Westside, I thought I got this down. 100%, I can go and do this. And then after a year, like, oh, I don't know anything. And then after it was really 7 years through this, I'm like, okay, I feel like I got a good idea who I am as a coach. And then I just refined that. But I think it's just watching, observing, asking questions, and talking to your athletes.
Mm,
And then trying to make it, how can I make this as simple as possible? It's not going to be sexy, especially in our league. It's not going to be sexy, but is it going to be effective? And do do the athletes have respect for you? Like, do
mm.
they respect what you're doing? Like, are you helping them? I think that all comes after time. I think just giving a crap is a huge thing.
Yeah, give a shit factor is important,
Well,
right?
when I worked with Matt Brown when I first got here,
Yeah.
I used to check in on him. He's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Just checking in." He was like, "Holy shit, I didn't realize like you cared." And I'm like, "Well, that's kind of like my job." And I think that's it. Like, it's
Wild.
just actually care is a big thing.
Yeah. Mm. How do you care about your athletes? Like, what do you think goes into that process? Not that that has to be something super mechanical here, but I'm
It's
curious.
it's not like I'm always thinking about what can we do better. I self-reflect on our um training every week. I'd say I'm not the best at texting or communicate. Like that's I think pretty well renowned here. But when they're in there, I always make myself available. And if an athlete needs help, they get help. Like that's
Yep.
really it. But I'm also just trying to figure out what they're doing, small little conversations in the gym. Because the answer is always within the gym. And that's really it. But the self-reflection is a big thing. And just looking back at like, can we do anything better?
Mm.
But I think the biggest thing is just the athlete feedback loop of talking to him, like talking to him
Yeah.
before and after the sessions, like not saying, "Hey, stop your training session, have a big conversation." But those little conversations before and after give you a whole bunch of stuff, and they know if they ever need anything, they can come, and
Yeah.
we'll move heaven and earth to try to help them.
That's beautiful, man. I mean, I want to know like what did you learn from the athletes in the old era? So like 90s, 2000s, you kind of mentioned versus like what are you learning from the athletes in the modern era and how is that informing the training?
I can't really speak onto the athlete in the 90s because I was not here then, but that was just through Lou.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
I mean, just seeing how Lou interacted with his athletes and how he coached and guided, like Louis was not a tyrant, like was not didn't punish athletes by giving them more stuff. Like I think the best punishment is taking weights away from athletes than it
Mm,
is like giving it to them. But just seeing how he interacted like with them and everything was for the club. So it's for the betterment of the club and that helps the athlete. And just seeing yeah, his interactions compared to now, I think they're far more educated and we hammer a whole lot of trying to educate it. Like just last week at the end of the training session, we had a quick recap on cultural values, a quick recap on technique, and that way they get to ask us questions, but to become better strength coaches themselves. So I think they're more educated and have more empowerment over their own training, which is huge.
mm. And yeah, I think that's a really unique thing is like how much better educated the average athlete is on the fundamentals of strength and conditioning. Do you feel like talk to me a little bit more about you brought it up a few times, but making the athlete almost like a self coach,
Well,
right? And equipping them. Like what does that mean?
I mean, it's really good for logistics.
Mm,
If like we talk to enough strength coaches, like you might have a high school strength coach who it might be just be them, or they might have an assistant, might have 30 to 50 athletes. There is no way you can be a strength coach to them all. So if you put in some time to put in some fundamentals, break up into groups, have group leaders, then you can actually work with a bigger group. So the more you can educate them, and I said high school athletes, strength coaches are to me the most important, especially now. Like this is where you're going to get long-term development. Um, so the more you can educate your athletes on one, training, the gym culture, how to be a good training partner, how to spot, how to load, how to talk, communicate. If someone's going for a PR, they shout over to you. These things are huge, like uh, for strength coaches who are trying to do everything. So it allows you to actually manage large groups better. And then when these high school athletes develop into collegiate or pro athletes, they know what good training is. They've got good foundations and fundamentals of development. So that's huge. So then you know you can trust your athletes that they're going to do the right thing. They're going to know what bad training is, what is good training. But it makes your job as a coach easier to actually help the people who need the most coaching.
Well, and what I love about that is almost like fucking none of this is written in a textbook. Actually, none of what you just said, I don't think I've ever read. But I've heard that from so many people, and I've learned that from so many various like mentors over time. So I think this is like, at least for me going through this as, like interviewing you, like I really do think that if I were to synthesize this down, it's like the fastest way to get to mastery, the fastest way to become a better coach is truly to spend time under someone who's going to meaningfully pour into you and give you those like things that are like have to do with almost like everything outside the gym, and even like the X's and O's of strength training. Like, how do you treat people? How do you talk to them? How do you like foster trust? How does that, because that's nothing that's in super training. Like maybe it's a brief chapter. Like I know I have a buddy who finished med school and was like, so much of what like I'm gonna go do is going to be related to nutrition. And we had 2 pages in a textbook about it, and it was just like had nothing to do with like, treating the like actual root cause of the issues. So like, I guess where I'm going with that and to not like, to avoid waffling a little bit is when you have, uh, when you have athletes that are like new coming into the gym, right? I want to know like how are you developing buy-in, because a lot of them are like pro athletes who probably have like a certain amount of beliefs that are pretty strong about how they should be doing things, and you guys do not do things like by any means to like the standard other than your own. So like how does that unfold?
I think it just takes time,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not for everyone, and that's completely fine. Like there's some athletes that are absolute studs, but I just knew personality wise they would not click in here, and we just refer them to coaches where they would click in really good. It's just time because you can talk up a good game, but if someone's willing to give you at least 3 or 4 weeks, then you're like, okay, this is real. And my style of coaching is like I'm pretty hands off. Like I'm not a big shouter or motivator, like to where trying to get people to go, but I try to analyze and then try to jump in when necessary, but try to make the athletes run their own training session. Like just it's back to empowerment and trying to develop leaders. So anyone who trains here and they go somewhere else, I'd like to think they would be the leader of the group wherever they're going at.
Love that.
But I think buy-in takes time, and it helps when you have other athletes there to where they can look at like, oh, well, this person's been here for a while, and look at the success that they've had, and like that's the other thing too. Strength conditioning is just a cog in it. The success, the athletes is successful. Like
Yeah.
we're just there to help get more out of them. It's not because it's all the strength conditioning is making them world champions. But I think
Yeah.
buy-in takes time, and when you're talking about fast tracking mastery, I don't think there really is fast tracking. I just think it
Yeah.
just takes time. Like
Same.
I remember Louie was up at the York with the powerlifting meet in York, and they wanted to induct him to the York Hall of Fame, and he told him like, no fucking way, I still have stuff to do. I don't want to be inducted into anything. But I think mastery is just it's earned over a long period of time. There's no fast tracking, and I don't even think Louis would. He was still a student up until the day he died.
Mm-hmm. Interesting mindset to take on, right? Especially with someone as much of a tenure as what he had, to keep that white belt mindset's impressive thing to say the least. So I kind of want to end off, folks. Like if you have questions, make sure you get them into the chat now, because we'll be transitioning kind of out of the episode here in a little bit. But to kind of wrap us up today, I want to give like some really, really practical advice, especially on this technology piece to coaches. All right. So I want to know like what technologies you find useful. And then I want to know like what tech saps performance from the athletes. And as pragmatic as possible from your point of view, where are we at with that?
Um, it is not a product promotion, but bridge, like um been able to capture data fast and something easy for athletes to win. I
Yep.
think that technology has been huge. I love Excel, love Google Sheets. But when you try ask a 20-year-old to log on to Google Sheets and to input their stuff, they're like, what the heck is this? But being able to do that, like that's a huge advantage to technology. Um, the wearables, like the Whoops, the Auras, heart rate monitors, all that is pretty useful feedback. We try keep a caveat in that I want all our athletes to understand that it will tell you that potentially the day of a game you're in the red and you shouldn't do anything of like that is going to happen. So don't get so fixated. Because we had one of the guys, I'm like, yeah, you go tell Dana White that your Whoop said you can't perform today. See how that goes out. It's not going to work. Um, but they do give useful metrics back. Like the heart rate monitors are still hugely important. I like force plates, force decks, especially for isometrics and for jumps. It just gives back some things, and we find a way to put it in where the athlete it doesn't interrupt the flow. They just go do their isometrics. We're getting the data. We're very cautious of what we share with the athletes, not because we don't want them to have it, but we don't want them to get so obsessed. And that can happen in a tender unit. Like, well, how fast did I go? And they're going to just disrupt the training. Tender units, I think they're good for pre and post. I don't think you need them all the time, especially for our way of training. Um, but that's really what we use. And then the internet and AI, I might use it for research, for writing, for stuff like that. I am unbelievably dyslexic, so having something that can correct grammar and spelling has been phenomenal.
Yeah.
And then to been able to video analysis, been able to record videos. That's
Mm.
one thing that we forgot how valuable that was, but like part of our pathway is you have to record bench, squat, and deadlift. And once you record it, there's stuff that you miss in the mix. You might get some of it, but you don't get all of it. But being able to review video has been huge, especially to fine point some sort of accessory allocation and teaching points to the athlete. Because a lot of athletes are visual learners and been able to show them the video back, not in the middle of the workout, at the end, or send it to them post-workout. That level of feedback is huge because visually, if they can see it, they can correct it a lot faster than you verbally trying to teach them.
Mm. Okay. I like that you show the video after the training session. I hadn't heard that before. And it sounds like that's stemming from not wanting to disrupt the training session.
Yep.
So what does it mean to disrupt the training session?
You kill the natural flow of a session. If
Okay.
you come into like you go into a weight room that is in the middle of a session, you should be able to feel it. The palpable feeling of like, oh, they're getting after it. The music's blaring. There's people working out. They're trying to push each other. But if you try, hey, stop, 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 stop. Let's work on this now. Like there's a place for that. So like for me, the gym is a sacred space for everyone to train, and there's a time and a place before or after to give the information, unless it's going to be detriment to their health and you have to stop them straight away. But
Of course. Yeah, of course.
yep,
Yeah. I like this idea of keeping the gym sacred, man. That's fucking important.
yep.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool way of putting that. Okay. All right. Well, I think that will wrap us up for today in terms of, questions I've got. Now I want to kind of take more of a look at what the group here had for the day. So first question from Reno. Tom, can you give an example of how you calculate the load per minute on the combined dynamic effort day?
Yeah, we do a very simple version of the low per minute is when the athlete is finished, everything goes up into bridge, and we take the total volume and divide it by the total training time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we get our volume load per minute. And then we compare it pre and post. So it gives them a metric to where if you shave a minute off the time, then that goes up, or if you increase weight, it goes up. It gives a very valuable
Mm-hmm.
metric and adds to the training density a whole lot for dynamic effort. But that's how we
And
do it.
it and is it the like, do you always measure the session like, okay, all these same exercises, and then in like 12 weeks, if we do the same thing again, is that when you take the measurement, or is it like week to week?
Week to week, we'll take
Okay.
it, and then we'll do year to year.
Okay.
Um, and you'll see the VLPM will go up. It incrementally goes up, but if you see last year to this year, there's
Oh
about an
yeah.
average VLPM jump even from week one between 250 to 750 pounds, depending on the athlete. So it's just a good metric, and it makes dynamic effort day more competitive because
Yeah.
like we want competitive athletes. So if we can give
Yeah.
them something that doesn't disrupt the training session, and we kind of We had to break a few eggs to make the omelet at the start. It got too competitive, so we had to put in caveats for technique of like, hey, you can't throw technique to the wind. So we have like a percentage, like a 5%, maybe 10% grace, and then how you stack accessories helps. So you try to put stuff in to break up the aspect of it so they
Yeah.
can't cheat the system. But it does teach athletes a lot of things. One is how to work within a group. Someone turns out to be a team leader, brings people through it. Two is how to strategically choose how to do the accessories. Just
Yep.
because they're just say listed in one way doesn't mean you have to do them that way. So they're problem solving as they're going through it, and then there's competition between all the groups. So it's been a huge value add for our athletes. And like I don't want to use the word fun, but I like the word competition. Like it makes them it sparks that competitive aspect, and they're doing a lot of volume in under an hour, which people said couldn't be done.
Can you kind of like give us some numbers here just to geek out on like
Like
what's the
I would say
buck
like
up and down?
the yeah, I will. Like I think the biggest one we've done is 550,000 pounds of volume. Here's
in,
the
in an hour?
in 55 minutes, and here's the caveat. Most of that volume comes from sled work. Like sleds is a
Okay.
huge
Okay. Yep.
aspect. So you put in a sled, you put in a wheelbarrow,
Yep.
and you put in a weighted farmer's walk. Like that's how you increase volume. Sleds, I think people sleep on. Like
Big
they
time.
are the killer to add volume into any workout. Um,
Yes.
the safest unilateral exercise you can do, great for conditioning, great for keeping strength in. But yeah, and we don't do that all the time, but like that's when I would say we're going through a peak volume phase. We'll start creeping up there, but you'll see like the sleds been thrown in.
Yeah, and they're just getting a grueling amount of like almost per step,
Yeah.
like at
But
that point.
I would say on average, like they'll execute anywhere from 125,000 to 175,000 in about 28 to 35 minutes.
Do you find that there's any normative data here between athletes between different sports?
Um, our full body dynamic every day is a pretty good equalizer because you got people who are strong, maybe not great in endurance. You got people who are endurance not really strong, so they end up pretty similar. I think
Mm,
the biggest driver is body weight, just because some people are there's no coefficient factor. If there
yep.
was, like then it'd be a lot more normative, but um no, but I just go back into like sleds. Sleds are just a huge part of our
Yeah. Love that. Cool. Next one. So this is from James. Thanks, Tom and Cooper. Love your perspectives on strength training. The future is in good hands. Appreciate that, man. A final thought. I worked with many athletes, but I had an opportunity to work with Jules Bacon, late 80s, early 90s. He helped me realize practice slash observation is most important. Question. Louie was your mentor, but who else would you say influenced you early on? And I'll extend that question to who influences you now as well.
um early on. I would say like to this day, like I would read a lot of stuff by Terry Todd. I think Terry Todd put out a lot of
Mhm.
did a lot for the sport. Um like the academics, you look at Kramer. Um uh well, thanks to it's kind of I'm trying to make sure it's not post Lou. Um like Zatsiorsky was huge because I was lucky in college that uh the science of practice strength training was a optional read of which like there's a lot of stuff there.
Wow.
Um, but then a lot of yeah, I think that I think too like before I got into the industry, like there was other coaches or like local coaches, like the lectures we had. It's a good question. I haven't really thought about that in a while. Um, but I did get a lot from Terry Todd, like Bill Starr, like back in the day, like Elite FTS's website had
Yeah.
all like the articles are phenomenal. Um, like Joe DeFranco before I
Hmm.
got here, like it was bigger fat or was it what was his one? It wasn't bigger, faster, stronger. It was he had some DVD out, but they had Joe DeFranco and Louie in our
Yeah.
college. He had something
Yep.
training, I can't remember what it was, but those are people before I got into Westside that I would say I would research into. Um, and then I became obsessed with the Soviet literature as soon as I got to Westside. And
Hmm.
then reading outside of the strength and conditioning. Another good one that I got was The Game Changer by Fergus Connolly. I thought that was a
Yeah.
really good book. Uh,
Love that. You showed me that one. I freaking
yeah,
love that book.
Thinking
Yeah.
in Systems by Donna Meadows, looking at lean manufacturing systems, trying to find different ways just outside strength and conditioning. Currently, I don't know, there's not, I'm more so talking to older coaches than I am reading. I haven't really picked up any new books. There are some coaches that get published by main publishers that I cannot believe they're published because the content is not exactly riveting.
Yeah.
But the most of it is just I'm trying to look at as many of the elders in our sport and trying to pick their brains before they're not here. Like with Louie, I was lucky I picked his brain when he passed. I'd say a lot of my good questions came then. I'm like, crap. So now I'm trying to reach out to anyone who's been in the sport, regardless of they like conjugate, don't like conjugate. Apolloquin is another one too, like back in the day.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And then like understanding, like looking at what Alvin Roy did, what Oliver Meal did, Johnny Parker. There's so many that I think there was a Terry Terry and John Todd, they wrote a book on the history of strength and conditioning in the USA.
Cool.
Phenomenal book for anyone to go read. It goes through the whole history of where it started. I recommend that for anyone to wants to know more about the industry, especially here.
That's yeah. I would love to read that. You said Terry Todd.
Yep, Terry and John Todd. I think Terry was his last book before he passed.
Got it. Okay. I would love to. I would love to. Yeah. Yeah. Dive into that. That's super cool. All right. Last question. And you alluded to it a little bit, but like, what do you like to learn from outside of strength and conditioning related stuff that informs what you do in the gym?
Oh, I like looking at systems and I like
Yeah.
to understand how people can implement systems for not efficiencies, but look at stuff from a first principles aspect because I tend to overthink and overanalyze, and then it's analysis by paralysis. So I like to look at um, yeah, process-based learning and a lot from and I got that from working with equipment for Louis, like just talking
Mhm.
to engineers and fabricators. Um, I do like watching a lot of construction-based aspects, just because you see how they put stuff together, and I think there's a lot that can be carried over to that. Um, and then the book I'm rereading again is one called Essentialism by Greg McKeown. Really good book. But yeah, it's just processing, mindset, thinking, um, but systems. Our whole world is in the system. I think the more you can understand it, the better it is.
Love it. Beautiful, brother. Thank you so much for this awesome chat today. I feel like that kind of put me in a really good frame of mind for where we're at as a strength and conditioning community, and some of the important things that I think are we need to evangelize a little bit. I think my biggest takeaways today were figuring out ways to reach unity, right, as a strength and conditioning community. That I think was a main thing that really stuck out to me. But kind of some of the more stuff like in the nuts and bolts and the weeds, like talking about the art of strength and conditioning and how we should view this more as a trade than we should as like a science related thing that we have to, even though we know we have to marry those two things. So I got a lot out of the fact that you just cannot under any circumstances interrupt session flow. Like it has to be, there has to be there's almost a music to it, that needs to be preserved. And I think that's something, I'll definitely take away, in addition to just lots of first principles related thinking, man, and making sure that, we're honoring and respecting the elders, but also, having the balls to go out and experiment on our own and make something
And
meaningful.
I appreciate the opportunity, and like I am definitely not the spokesperson for the strength and conditioning community, but just a member of it. But I
Mm-hmm.
do think it's worth getting these elders on and having them actually pass on the experience and the stuff because that's who we all want to learn from. Because then
Yeah.
that's how we understand what to do, what not to do.
Give me some names, man. Who would you want to see on this show?
Oh, I'll give them to you off the record just in case.
Okay.
Just in case I put someone out there and they're like, "What have you done to me?" But
Fair
I've
enough.
got a good few for you.
Okay, beautiful. Sounds good. Well, folks, as always, appreciate you making the time to be here with us. It's always so much fun, so cool to see our global community get together once a month and sit here and listen. So take care, folks. Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you
Happy
for listening.
4th. Take care, y'all. See ya.